Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. Do you plan to thrive or just try to survive this holiday season? That's the conversation that we're having today with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette, our resident therapist expert. And we both felt it was time to reframe the usual surviving the holiday narrative with something else. Instead of just getting through, we wanted to talk about how you can actually find enjoyment and meaning during this busy and, as we well know, sometimes stressful time. And so together we dig in and focus on 4 areas that create holiday pressure. 1, financial strain. 2, tricky family dynamics. 3, the pain of losing a loved one. And 4, dealing with career changes, especially a job loss, which all are heightened by the expectations we're setting for ourselves and others during this time of the year. Dr. Jen and I share real-life stories and some practical insights into healthy communication around setting boundaries and aligning your holiday experience to what truly matters to you. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. We're going to talk about a fun topic. It's year end. We're recording this in mid-November. It's going to come out before the holidays hit. And I don't know what the title of this episode's going to be, but I hate using the word like surviving the holidays, which is what we're going to talk about, or surviving like the teenage years or the toddler years. It's like, when you use that word surviving, it's got such a negative connotation to it. And so hopefully you're going to guide us on how to maybe break those, especially dealing with the holidays that are going to be upon us. And you could take one of these however way you want, or however many you want to chew on today. But when I think of the holidays, I think of obviously emotions. It's the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast, but there's like 4 that kind of come to mind. So I'll lead off with the obvious with what I do, the financial aspects of it. Then there's the dealing with family, who you may or may not like. Then you also have people that are really hurting, and are hurting in potentially like 2 ways that I typically am talking with people. I just met with a family yesterday. They are hurting because they just lost a loved one. And losing a loved one at this time of year is incredibly difficult. It's not like it's easier in May than it is in November or December, but there's just the emotion of the holidays that you're dealing with. And the 4th is what I'm dealing with personally. And I've personally have had this happen to me in my corporate career where I was transitioned out of my position in November. It's like the worst time of the year to not have a job. So I laid out 4 things. 1, financial. 2, family who you may or not like. Dealing with the loss of a loved one. And 2, or I guess 4, is dealing with the loss of a potential job. Like all at this pressure cooker of a time. And I know that we talked back in the spring, there was the term Maycember going around, which kind of related to like how busy parents were towards the end of school and relating it to how busy, November and December are with end of year holidays, all that. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So you can pick whatever of those 4 options you want to deal with first, because everybody's dealing with it. And as you mentioned, all the a lot of the families that you meet with week in, week out are dealing with one of those 4 issues as well. So this is going to be a fun conversation.
Absolutely. I was thinking this morning, gosh, I wish we had 2 hours for this one. So maybe we'll do a part 1 and then next year we'll do a part 2 or something. But yes, all of those things, right? I mean, it is fraught. And for those watching rather than listening, I hope you could see my big smile when you said, I kind of want to get away from this word surviving. I do too. And that's exactly where I wanted to start with. We can search, if you look in your podcast provider, you can see so many podcasts and articles about surviving the holidays. And I'm with you. I would like to do more than just survive the holidays. And maybe we just talk about enjoying the holidays, right? Or having the holidays and not getting knocked off kilter. I think we use that term survival because of all the things that you just mentioned. It can be so fraught. And it can be very, very emotional. We have a lot of heightened emotions because of the expectations that we place on certain events. So I'll talk about all of those things that you mentioned in some way, shape, or form, and then we can dive deeper into some of them here.
I do have to laugh there because when you said expectations, I'm like, oh, there's the kindling on the firewood right there, or on the fire right there.
Exactly. And that's where I want to start, right? I think the reason, or one of the reasons why December feels harder than June for any of those things, losing someone, losing a job, having family conflict, is because of the expectations that we have on this period of time. And I think about this every year when we move into the holidays, or, we set up decorations or, trees or gifts or all of these things that, we think of this as a very finite period of time. Oh, the holidays, as though it's just a couple of days. For many people in America, we devote 1/6 of the year to this period of time, right? Maybe 1/12 of the year, a lot, right? A big chunk of time, but we hold ourselves as though we're sprinting rather than running a marathon. And so we end up, last episode, we talked about that idea of allostatic load, or a couple episodes ago where we're kind of getting through these high stress periods of time. Well, our bodies are pretty good at that for a day, maybe an hour, right? We can get through stuff. We can kind of white knuckle it and grit our teeth. The holidays are not like that. We're talking about days, weeks, perhaps months of time. And if we're approaching it as something to survive and grit our teeth through, it's no wonder that we're going to end up completely spent or burnt out or regressing to old family patterns, which we will talk about today too. So we need to think about this as a chunk of time, right? And rather than trying to survive it the way we would survive a negative experience or a finite, brief, challenge in our life, how do we move through this time with our values in mind? So, when I think about the holidays, I think of so many different topics that you and I have talked about over the years. Values is one of them. So I want to go back to that topic for a second and distinguish values from expectations. They sound similar. What do you value? What do you hope? What do you expect? But our values are such a driving force for us in terms of, are we living a life that we enjoy? Are we practicing psychological flexibility and being able to meet ourselves where we actually are? And oftentimes we have very unspoken expectations about the holidays. Maybe I have an idea of what I want, which might be different than my spouse, which might be different than my children, which might be different than my parents, my in-laws, right? And so we have this collapse of everybody's expectations, which are just by definition going to be quite different because most of the time we're not talking about them. So part of what I'm going to be advising today is a series of conversations. And this is kind of a choose your own adventure for our listeners, right? It's challenge by choice. You can have as many or as few of these conversations as you'd like to.
Challenge by choice. That's a good one.
That's how I think about my climbing practice a lot of the times. Challenge by choice, right? You know, we determine the level of challenge that we're going to bring in, and conversations are challenging a lot of the time. And so it makes sense that we get avoidant about having what we think of as maybe a hard conversation. I'm putting that in quotes because it's not always as hard as we expect. And we're not always as far off in our values or our desires as we think we are, but we often don't know. So when I think about families and boundaries and all of these conversations, I come back to this concept, which I think we might have talked about once or twice, called the ask versus guess culture, or asking versus guessing what other people are thinking, wanting, needing, expecting. And so for me, I'll kind of just center this on how I often approach the holidays. I like to start by having conversations with the people who are in my closest circle, my husband, my children. What do we want this year to be like? What's important to us? How would we like to spend some time? Who would we like to see? That's not to say that everybody gets to, veto everybody else and say, okay, I said this, and so this is what has to happen. But how will I know if I don't ask? And if we have extended family, I want them to be asking, or I want to be asking, what's important to you this year? And notice I'm saying what's important rather than what should we do or whose house should we be at, right? To keep it more of an open question, or if I have a very strong preference, to say, here's what's important to me, here's what's important to my family. What we're doing instead most of the time is we're guessing. And our culture is full of these kinds of guesses, which then often leads to make suring, where we're trying to mind read. We're trying to figure out, well, I know so-and-so thinks we should be at their house for Thanksgiving this year. Or I know so-and-so is going to be upset if we don't repeat this family tradition. And so we often pretzel ourselves into shapes that aren't quite comfortable for us, trying to meet the guessed expectations of other people. They may not be accurate.
Are we guessing because we're just afraid to ask because we don't want to be let down, or we think we know what the answer is, and in reality, we may or may not?
That's often why we do that. Yep. We're often guessing because it's uncomfortable. We're very phobic as humans, particularly in this culture, of discomfort. And it's interesting because I'm saying I don't want to just survive, I want to enjoy. And yet, oftentimes, particularly when we're moving toward things that are important to us, there may be some discomfort, and that's okay. And we often have many moments of discomfort throughout the day, but the anticipatory anxiety around discomfort can get in our way. So to your point here, we may think that it will be uncomfortable if we have a real conversation with someone saying, hey, I'm wondering what you'd like this year, or I'd like to share with you what my family would like this year. And so we avoid those conversations. We fill in all the blanks with mind reading, which is incredibly inaccurate. Right. Even as a psychologist, I am not good at mind reading, even within my immediate family. It's just not accurate. And then we get into the resentments that can come with that kind of mind reading and make suring. Well, we all hauled ourselves across the country because we thought it was important to you that we were there. And now it feels like it's not important because you're not paying attention to us, right? Or we cleared our schedule to welcome you to this event and you didn't show up, or you didn't seem like you wanted to be there. Well, the problem might be that we didn't ask the questions, or we didn't really have the conversation. So we're going off of assumptions on top of assumptions. And at the end of the day, when we do that, oftentimes no one is really doing what feels right to them. So it's no wonder that we feel this sense of, I have to survive, right? I have to make it through this. We're not really enjoying it.
So I remember I'm trying not to age myself because I've got my big milestone birthday next year, but I don't remember it being as chaotic growing up as it feels like it is today. And I don't know if this is related to one of the strings I would pull on from what you said, is that we're trying to make everybody happy and be all things to all people and make sure that we're getting to like everybody's house, and then at the end of the day, it's like, well, you're somewhere where you don't really want to be. You're doing something that you don't really want to do. What's the point of enjoying the holidays if that's what it's like? And I kind of see that with my own kids today, because like we typically will head up north for the Christmas break for 4, 5, 6 days maybe. And there's a lot of times where like we are begrudgingly dragging them along. Like I tell them, I'm like, well, does it really make a difference if you're on your electronic device in the 483 area code versus like Traverse City? Like to me, it's all the same, but to them, it's a much bigger deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It does feel more complicated now than it did when we were kids, right? Growing up in the 70s and 80s, right? Where there was kind of the script of what we did for the holidays. Yeah. It was simpler. I don't know if it was more enjoyable, right? And
I was just going to say, I don't know if I liked it anymore, because I do remember as a kid growing up, like always being pulled from being able to play with my new toys to have to go to my great grandmother's house. God rest her soul. But it's like, that was not an enjoyable time for an 8 or 9-year-old kid.
Right. And, so I think there are pros and cons to the shifts that we've seen. There's a lot more flexibility in our culture now. There's a lot more ability to travel, be where we want to be. There's a lot more options, and there is a more, I would say, probably healthy and appropriate focus on, boundaries, self-care. What do we need as individuals? And it injects a lot of layers of questions. And again, those kind of question marks. I often talk about that in therapy, where I just see all these question marks floating around where we don't really know. So we're making our best guess, and we're often wrong. So I like to pull back a little bit. And I know it's tricky because this podcast will probably come out kind of between New Year's and the winter holidays. I'm sorry, between Thanksgiving and the winter holidays. But as soon as possible, like now, I like to really pull back and say, what would make this enjoyable, right? What is my intention? What am I hoping to come out of this period of time with? What would make this feel successful for me, for you, for the people who really matter to me here? And what is the meaning of some of these events or rituals or activities that we're talking about? I think back in the day, back in our childhood, there was an assumption that it meant the same thing to everybody, right? That everybody appreciated having the ritual, the routine, and that may still be true for many people and many families. That may not be true for everybody. And I will say this as a fortunate thing here. I was fortunate to have 2 households when I was growing up. My parents were divorced. And so I had to get really comfortable with, sometimes I'd spend the holidays at one house and then I'd have another version of the holidays at another house. I actually really see that as a benefit for me, because it made me a whole lot more flexible around, I don't care where I am on this date. Right. Yeah. I want to spend some time with these people in this way. If it can be on this date, fantastic. If it's on the next day or a week later, that's fine. Because
that's interesting, because I thought that would be like make you like really upset.
Yeah, it didn't really. And perhaps that's just because everything felt like I got 2 Christmases, right? Or 2 Thanksgivings. I always saw it as a positive, and I know it's not that way for everybody. But my point is more, I think sometimes there's meaning behind these rituals, meaning behind these days that we may not be accurately assessing. Is it about the date, or is it about togetherness? Is it about the gifts and the financial burden, or is it about the experience that we're giving ourselves or somebody else? And, I have my own answers to those questions. Other people's answers might be different, but we don't know. Right? We don't know unless we have those conversations. And I really have come to take the stance that if someone's not asking me for something and then they are disappointed that I didn't give them that thing, I can't worry about that so much, right? My hope would be that then they would say to me, oh, I really am upset that this didn't happen, or I'd like to see you in this way. And I can't guess at that. right? I can be really clear. And I often pull on Brene Brown's quote that I love so much: clear is kind, unclear is unkind. So I can be really clear on, our family tradition is that we do this on this date. You're welcome to join us, or we'll see you in a different way, in a different time. But if I'm not being clear about that, then we've got all the question marks up there. And then I have a lot of anxiety about what I think someone else might be thinking, which is really not mine.
Yeah. I'm trying to decide like what thread I pull on that next, because like, how do we, I know it's probably, the answer is probably through the conversations that you're talking about, but how do you get the focus, like make the main thing, and whatever that focus may be, whether it's being together, doing something as a family versus trying to get off of trying to make everybody else happy, because I think there's a lot of trying to appease people, I think, during the holiday season that goes on, which just makes it harder.
Yes, exactly. And just even that word appease, right? How enjoyable is that for anybody to be appeased?
Sounds like
right?
I guess a less negative tone than survive.
Right. And as the appeasee, right? Do I enjoy being appeased if I really can figure out that's what's happening? And so I think that's why often we have this survival bent, is because it feels like nobody's really enjoying that time together, which to me just feels like a tragedy.
Yeah. And I think with having a big family, a family of 6 with us, with the triplets plus 1, like I think, and I know this really frustrates Teresa, and it does to me to a certain degree. It's like, we'd all like to be harmoniously together doing something that makes us all happy. Well, when the more people you get together, the bigger the group is, it feels like the less harmony you're going to get, because people just want to do their own thing. And well, there's a powerful, like in working with the Tama families I have, there's a powerful document that I show them, and it basically lists, you could do this for holidays or summers. I do it for summers. Is how many summers left do you have as a family of whatever you have, 6 or 5 or 4? And I've seen some people get really emotional over that, because they realize that, there's a finite period of time. And hopefully I'm not going too deep with Teresa on this one, but I like to give this as many real world examples of this as possible. But I know that that's really hit her, because I've shown her that a couple times over the last year. And so I think it puts even more pressure, I think, on these holidays, because we know that we only have so many left before they're gone. And yeah, they come back, but then they come up in different ways. They grow up, they have families of their own, and then sooner or later, like, you're not even spending Christmas Day like you've done since they were born together, because now they have families to go to. And I think that pressure can really weigh on people, and I'm not quite sure like how to help relieve that, because sometimes when I'm trying to have that conversation, it does not go well, because I usually put my foot in my mouth and it goes the opposite direction.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple things that I try, particularly for bigger families. Part of what we're talking about is boundaries. And I know we kind of touch on boundaries periodically, and it's such an important topic. So whenever I'm talking about boundaries, I want to begin by saying boundaries are not just about keeping people out. It sounds that way, right? We think of boundaries as kind of like a brick wall. I think of it much more like a fence with a door, where when we are in our boundaries in a way that feels comfortable, we're letting people or experiences into a place that we are comfortable, and we're also keeping certain things out. The letting in is important. And so around the holidays, since we're talking about this, I like to try by saying, what if we got to the other side of the holidays and looked backward and said, wow, that was great, right? I really enjoyed that. What might have happened, right? Is it that
no fighting,
right? So maybe there's things that we don't want, right? So no fighting. And so there's a boundary around that. So maybe we'll take these kind of piece by piece as they come up, no fighting. And that might be very well if you sat down with your family of 6 at the dinner table tonight and said, let's all think about our ideal holiday experience. Maybe someone would say no fighting. And and this is big in our society right now because there are a lot of differences, right? Families may have political differences, religious differences, differences in terms of what the holidays mean to them, right? And so fighting might happen. Also, there's this phenomenon that happens when we're back with our family of origin, where we fit right back into those generational patterns that we're used to, and we become 10 years old again, even if we're 49 years old now. And so all of this can lead to fighting, arguments, friction. And it is okay to set boundaries before, during, or after. So the conversations that I'm hoping people start having with their immediate family or whoever they really want to spend the holidays with are a little bit of those before. What are the boundaries that we as a family want to set before the holidays so we can try to set it up in a way that's going to get as much of what we're hoping for as possible? Notice I'm not saying perfect because it's not going to be perfect. And those boundaries might be based on looking back on previous years where it's a little bit of a setting a boundary after, like, oh, that didn't work, right? That didn't feel good for us to try to go to 3 houses in one day. Or that didn't feel good to have 30 people over for dinner when we hadn't asked for people to bring food or whatever it is, right? So we can set those boundaries ahead of time. And with fighting in particular, I think it's absolutely okay to set ground rules. Say, hey, we don't agree on everything. I'd like to keep certain topics out of our holiday dinner, right? Or if you're a family who enjoys having debates, that's fine. But checking in with other people, because maybe not everybody enjoys that. I mean, I'm not someone who particularly enjoys debates, and I know some people really do. It stresses me out. I don't need it in my life.
I'm in your camp too.
Yeah. And it's not bad or wrong if people like that, right? I have some attorneys in my family who love to debate and argue. There's even games they want to play with me. I'm like, that's not my style, right? But that's okay. Those are boundaries that we set. And it's okay to say, in an effort for us to all really get along, let's focus on things that we enjoy talking about. Let's have certain topics not be on the table. And if they happen in vivo, to try to have a calm reaction and say, I don't think this is something that's worth talking about right now, right? That is an okay boundary to set.
So if we pivot to like one of the next of the points I brought up on the financial side is, in all the years I've been an advisor, no family's ever asked me, how much should we spend at Christmas? It's usually a topic that Teresa and I argue about often because here living in the Midwest in the North, like we desperately want to get out of here either, around the holiday, not necessarily the holiday time, but shortly after there in February, because February here in Michigan is not a nice time of the year to be here. And so we know that there's a huge expense coming there for a trip, which is only like 6 weeks after, Christmas or Hanukkah or the holidays in December. And there's a lot of that can create a lot of tension because you still want to provide for your kids and have them to have this, special holiday. But then, on the backside, you're going to be spending a lot of money on a trip in the not too distant future. And I think that's another area where parents especially are having discussions which can then turn into arguments about how much they're spending. I don't necessarily have a silver bullet answer for anybody out there, except that I think the one thread I would pull from what you've brought up so far, Jen, is to make sure you're having that conversation, with your spouse and try to level set expectations about what we want to afford, what we can afford, knowing that, we're in this place now, but, potentially in 6 weeks, we're going to be spending some significant amount of money on a trip.
Yeah. It's a huge stress associated with the holidays. And you're right, Paul. I don't think people talk about it nearly enough. We end up in that more is more mentality, or that, December 24th panic of, I'll just buy 5 more things because I don't know if I have enough under the tree. Right. And I would say in general, I try to avoid black and white statements. I will make one here. I think less is often more, particularly with financial spending on gifts and, what our children really need, in quotes. There's so much stuff, right? And as a parent, I've never seen my child as happy with stuff as they expect to be, right?
Remember when your kids were little and like they get a toy in a box and they play with the toy for like 2 seconds and then they play with the box?
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Forts of boxes, right?
Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned it enough because my triplets' birthday is December 9th. So it's pretty close to Christmas. And I remember like when they were younger, like we would re-gift some of their birthday presents to them on Christmas because they didn't know the difference. And we were just overwhelmed with so much stuff.
Yes.
And it didn't make any sense. Even though I like would beg and plead people like just put $25, $50, whatever in their 529 account. And that's still a reason why I tell parents to open up a 529 account today, even if they don't contribute. I know grandparents or aunts and uncles or other family and friends would more than be glad to do something like that rather than getting a toddler a gift that is going to get played for 5 minutes and then move on to something else.
Exactly. I've done the same thing, Paul, even year to year. Like, oh my goodness, this gift from last year has not been opened. I'm going to put it back under the tree, right? No one notices. And that's pretty telling, right? If no one notices. So, less is often more. My family, my immediate family, our philosophy is really experiences over things as much as possible. And I've tried to ask, in an ask versus guess way, I've tried to ask my extended family for the same thing. Instead of a bunch of stuff, we would really love this experience, or maybe come do this experience with us, or let's all go do something together. We'll remember those experiences so much more. That was my philosophy when I got married as well, is rather than a big gift registry, experiences, right? And I still remember the great experiences that I got as wedding gifts, for example. But, the idea of budgeting, where it's kind of the B word that we don't use all the time. Budgeting isn't just for money, right? We can budget our time. We can budget our own self-care. And I think having conversations with our family, particularly you were talking about maybe, all 4 kids don't necessarily want to go up north or something like that. That can be part of the conversation of what is something that would be really important to you to have blocked in or budgeted into this holiday time. And maybe we all take turns with that, right? Maybe each of your children gets to decide an event that they're going to do that day that everybody joins with, or, and this is a little radical, maybe we don't do everything together. Right. That's actually one of my best tips for the holidays is we don't have to do everything together, even if we are all together in one place. It's okay for you and Teresa to have a date night midway through that week. It's okay for your kids to have a date with a friend, or it's okay for grandparents to have a one-on-one with one of the children, just to change up that dynamic, to get a little bit of breathing room. And I think particularly for spouses, there's such a pressure cooker often when we have extended family around. I strongly recommend, even if it's just a walk around the block, that you extricate yourself from time to time, kind of like those mini vacations that we talked about.
Yes.
Because you cannot sustain, right? We get into that, kind of pressured environment. And that's often where we have explosive behavior, or we say things that we regret, or we go back to that regression of feeling like a very small child, is because there's pressure on top of pressure. It might only take 5 minutes to breathe and have a mindful moment, reground into our senses, alone or with somebody else. And we can budget that into this time. I think we often get into a lot of trouble as extended families where there's an expectation that we're together for 72 hours without a break, right? I can't spend 72 hours with anybody without a break, let alone the people who raised me, right? We are going to piss each other off at some point, right? It's just going to happen.
Yeah. That's when you sneak out to go to the movie on Christmas Day or the day after.
Yep.
I want to move into the last couple items I mentioned because, I just had a meeting with a family that, like, as I mentioned, lost their mom just, a month ago. And really, like, during parts of the meeting, I was just sitting there holding this lady's hand and, getting emotional, having some tears shed. and just having her talk about her mom and just listening is from some of the psychology that I've read over the years when it comes to loss and dealing with grief like this is the one thing I try to that you want to avoid is the word I'm so sorry for your loss. Do you apply to that? Is that I guess how does that resonate with you? Because what I'm looking for is like how to guide people on how to have conversations with people over the next, over the holiday season that have lost a loved one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is such a painful time. And I'm glad we're coming back to this, right? We talked about the loss of a loved one or the loss of a job. Those are never easy, particularly because of the way that we load the holidays with meaning. It can be even harder when it happens around the holidays because of those expectations, right? My mom is supposed to be here, or I'm supposed to be going back to a job in January, or whatever we have in our mind as those expectations. And I think one thing that's kind of the gift that keeps giving with this is anniversaries are hard too. So when we lose someone on November 12th is always going to be hard. So it's not just this holiday season, it's every holiday season. We're going to be remembering that this is when we lost that person, or when we had that traumatic experience with our job, or whatever that trauma and grief is really referring back to. So let me take it maybe in terms of the person who's experienced the loss, and then how do we talk to these folks. I think if you're the person or the family who's experiencing the loss, the first thing I want to say is we have to feel those feelings. And I know I'm a broken record with this, but the more we try to avoid feeling, the more that feeling is going to get louder and just knock on our door incessantly. And grief is so hard because it's a combination of feelings. It's not just sadness. It can be anger. It can be confusion. It can be, all of what we think of as the stages of grief, like bargaining and denial, right? There can be some acceptance. But when we think about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who created those 5 stages of grief, it was never intended to be a linear path. It's not like we start in denial and we end with acceptance, right? We're going to just go in and out of those mood states for a long time. Right. A really long time, maybe longer than we even expect. And that's normal and it's okay. And the more we allow ourselves to make contact with those emotions, the easier we're going to actually move through those and be able to see through to the other side of that tunnel. We'll never stop missing that person, nor do we want to. But having those emotions be acceptable is much more healthy and effective for us than trying to not have them. So that's one really important thing. Talking about it is very helpful for a lot of people, even if you're more introverted and you like to process internally. The reason that it's so supportive for you to do what you did, Paul, is you're a witness to this person's grief, right? You're a witness to the stories about that person. And so if we're in the position of trying to support someone or just even comfort someone who's experienced a loss, just asking them to tell me about that person, right? What were they like? If someone comes into my office and they've just experienced a loss, I'm just going to get really curious. Tell me about this person's role in your life. What did you learn from them? What parts of them do you think live on in you, right? I'm personally not opposed to that phrasing of, I'm sorry for your loss. I think maybe the reason that we get a reaction to it is that it might feel trite or kind of like, okay, I've checked the box and now I've comforted you. So we may truly be sorry for someone's loss. I've said that to someone before. And we may want to just say more, right? I know how much that person meant to you. You were just telling me about how close you felt to that person, or grief is often complicated. I'm so sorry for this loss. I know that this relationship wasn't always easy. And I imagine there's a lot of feelings that you're having right now, right? That's probably always true for someone who's experienced a loss. And, the grief is its own form of traumatic experience, particularly depending on how we handle it. And it might remind us of other traumatic experiences. Right. So this grief might remind our neural circuitry of other sadnesses that we've experienced. And it can start kind of a spiral where we feel like we're going to get stuck. And I just want to say we're not going to get stuck in grief, but we may need to feel feelings that we haven't felt before. And then the question becomes, okay, what do we do, right? How do we move through this time? Like I said, talking is really important. There are a lot of things set up for people, particularly around the holidays, to support. There are actual support groups for people who've experienced loss, also job loss. And that can be really healing because we're with other people who've experienced similar things. Maybe our family isn't going to be the most supportive about this particular loss for whatever reason. Maybe they're grieving too. If someone loses a spouse, there may be children who are grieving who they need to support, right? So, the weightiness of the holidays layered on top of this, it could be really helpful to access our own support, maybe even therapy, like we've talked about a couple times. And I would say this is a particularly good time to be mindful of social comparisons. So,
Yep.
we're going to go online if we're on social media and we're going to see everybody blasting photos of the happy nuclear family, or we're going to see the grandparents with the grandchildren. And if we've just lost our children's grandparents, that might be really devastating for us. So we don't have to expose ourselves to that if we're really in the thick of it, right? There's nothing to be gained from looking at what we don't have over here. So maybe instead of doing that, we focus on helping others, or we focus on creating a new set of rituals for our family that even though this person's no longer with us, we get to now decide, how do we honor them? How do we move forward? What do we decide is important to us?
So I think I'll close and maybe just offer like my own piece of advice as somebody who went through a job loss during the holiday and are dealing with or working with families that are doing that right now. Is that it always seems Pollyanna to say it'll be okay, you're going to get through it, and not realize. I think what you just pointed out is that the real emotional loss of losing part of your identity in your job. Having gone through that myself, having seen others go through it as well, in the nearly 20 years I've been an advisor, I've always seen. And I try really hard to think about that one exception, but I can never come up with it. And hopefully I never do, that didn't come out on the other side better than where they were before. But where you're in the moment of that, of being let go, the emotional roller coaster ride that begins at that very second is like no other. And you never, the thing in your mind, you're thinking I'm never going to get off of this.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be realistic to think that, I don't want to say this. I don't want to sound like I'm, again, Pollyanna or overly optimistic, because you're going to go through, like you mentioned, those 4 stages of grief, or 5 stages of grief, I should say, just like you would anything else. But surrounding, and I know we've talked about this before, and you just mentioned it again, is surrounding yourself with the right people and the right environment, and realizing who you can talk to about this and who you can't. Because sometimes if you're married or in a relationship, sometimes that's not always going to be your spouse or partner. It's going to need to be somebody else. And just having that sense of awareness and doing everything that you can to try to put yourself in a better position, and know that this is temporary, and not to mistake today for permanency. And I swear to God, you've said that to me before on this show.
No feeling is final, right?
Yeah, no feeling is final. And to help carry that through and alleviate some of the negative emotions or connotations that you may be feeling, but to be able to realize, yes, I'm feeling this, it's okay. But then there'll become a point where it's like, okay, now I've got to take that next step forward.
Yes, exactly.
I don't know how all that lands with you, but
yeah, no, it's exactly what we talk about so often, Paul. I mean, we're really looking at validation, right? That it makes sense that we feel the way we feel. And when if we're in the position of supporting someone, whether it's the holidays or any time through a loss, if we can help them understand that we get it, right? That it really makes sense to me that you're feeling the way that you're feeling, then that feeling is acceptable. And that's our way of allowing that person to feel that feeling, right? They don't need our permission. But if we're coming at them, here's the phrase I would avoid more so than I'm sorry for your loss, which I think could be benign. It could be dismissive, right? The phrase I'd like to avoid is at least, right? Well, at least they didn't suffer. At least you didn't really love that job. At least you got a lot of time with them. When we're grieving, there's no least about it. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's often our own discomfort, our own anxiety of, I don't know what to say to this person, and I'm trying to soften it for them. That's not our job, right? We don't have to make sure that anybody feels a different way than they feel. Much more effective is, that makes sense, right? Tell me more about that. Or, gosh, I'm feeling that with you as I hear you talk about that. I mean, that's such a radical level of validation, the way that you described feeling emotional with your client, having tears with her tears. You don't even have to say anything, right? You are there, and your presence is validating because you're feeling those emotions. So therefore, of course, they make sense. So that's really our only job is just to be with others in their emotions if they trust us enough to loop us in and tell us what's happening. And if they don't, it's okay, right? That's a boundary they may be setting. And so I guess maybe one other thing to just say with this whole, boundaries, extended family, holidays conversation is if we're feeling someone pull back, right? Maybe there's someone that you'd like to spend some time with and they're not responding or they're pulling back and we don't know why. Rather than guessing, we can ask, right? Is there something going on? Is there a way that I can support you? And we can also assume, I try to stay out of assumptions, but when I allow assumptions in, it's usually because I'm trying to assume that there's a good reason, right? That there's a reason that I don't understand, right? Maybe they've lost someone or lost a job and I have no idea. Or maybe they're experiencing something that they're not comfortable talking about that has nothing to do with me. So one of my phrases that I use a lot in terms of in my quest to avoid the make sureing dynamic that we've talked about is it's none of my business, right? It's none of my business until someone decides to share with me. And Anne Lamott has a great quote, no is a complete sentence. So if someone says no to me and they're not explaining why, it's none of my business, right? I can ask, and if they want to share, fine. If they don't, that's okay. And it's also none of my business what other people think about me. So if I set a boundary, I have to just set the boundary because it's important to me, because my intention is that I want to do this differently. And it's none of my business how that boundary lands. And I know that's really tricky because we want to be liked by everybody. We want everyone to be comfortable. I hope that when I set boundaries, I do it kindly and clearly and that people walk away with a deeper understanding of me and that I'm doing this in the service of our relationship. And if they don't, it's none of my business, right? Until they decide to make it something that they want to talk with me about. That for me has been really freeing because it helps me get out of that spin of, did I upset somebody or did they misunderstand me or are they quietly judging me? They might be. It's none of my business, right? It doesn't impact me until it impacts me.
Well, that was a full conversation. And I hope that we're leaving the listeners with at least a few things that they can take away from our conversation to help not survive, but thrive during this upcoming holiday season. So once again, Dr. Jen, I can't thank you enough. You are amazing when it comes to having these conversations and providing those little nuggets of wisdom and action items that we can all take away and help lead better lives. So thank you.
Happy to be here, Paul. Happy holidays to all of you.
You as well. I think the key theme of this entire conversation with Dr. Jen has been, how do we move beyond this survival mode mentality and into a thrival mode mentality when it comes to the holidays? And there are two key points I want to mention. The first is, how do we hold real conversations and not just guess throughout this holiday season? Because many of our holiday stressors are rooted in unspoken assumptions. And as Dr. Jen mentioned, she recommends having open discussions, asking what matters most to your family, and also sharing what matters most to you. What are your priorities? And how do we set, honest boundaries around what we want to do versus what others perceived want us to do? And I think the other key is honoring these emotions that we're feeling and these boundaries that I just mentioned. Whether you're coping with a loss from a loved one, financial strain, career transition, or just other family dynamics, allowing space to feel all of these feelings. We talked about the 5 stages of grief, but being able to communicate these boundaries in a kind manner, I think helps to have a more meaningful holiday season. And in speaking of the holiday season, I hope that everyone has a great Thanksgiving. We will be off next week, and then we'll be back that first week of December with another new episode.
Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.